She barely moved, just a flick of her fingers, gone in half a second. No one noticed, except the man who built his life on spotting danger before it spoke. And the moment Aaron Renard understood what that little girl had just asked him to do, walking away stopped being an option. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow, and while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. No one at the airport that day knew they were sitting near a man who controlled half the city's underground. Aaron Renard looked like every other businessman, dark navy suit, tailored to precision, black dress shirt underneath, the kind of quiet sophistication that came with money but didn't scream for attention. But when an 11-year-old girl, 3 seats away, lifted her hand and made a signal meant for emergencies, she couldn't speak aloud. He saw what everyone else missed, and in that split second, a child's silent scream for help reached the one person in the terminal who understood exactly what it meant. She sat rigidly in the gray plastic chair, small frame swallowed by an oversized gray hoodie, her neck locked in a white cervical brace that looked too clean to be from a recent accident. A small bandage covered part of her left cheek, pale against skin that hadn't seen enough sunlight. Light brown hair pulled back in a ponytail that hung limply down her back. She didn't fidget the way children usually do. She didn't swing her legs or look at her phone or ask the 1,000 questions kids typically asked during boring airport waits. She just sat, eyes down, hands folded in her lap like she'd been taught to take up as little space as possible. Aaron had been working on his laptop emails that required careful wording, deals that moved money through channels most people didn't know existed, when his gaze drifted across the seating area. Professional habit. He scanned crowds the way other men checked sports scores, threats, opportunities, patterns that didn't fit. The girl caught his attention first because of her stillness. Children were chaos by nature. This one was practicing invisibility. Then he noticed the man beside her. Mid-40s, maybe 50, clean-shaven, dark jacket over a collared shirt, the kind of outfit that belonged in a parents' night at a decent suburban school. He scrolled through his phone with the casual ease of someone who had nothing to hide, occasionally glancing at the departure board overhead. When the girl shifted slightly in her seat, just a small adjustment, the movement of someone whose neck hurt, he placed a hand on her shoulder. Not rough, not threatening to anyone watching, just firm enough to remind her he was there. That's when she did it. A brief glance toward the passing crowd, hand rising slowly, as if to brush a strand of hair from her face, fingers forming a shape so quick, most people would have thought she was adjusting her hoodie. But Aaron saw it clearly, thumb tucked into her palm, 4 fingers raised, then folded down in sequence, the silent signal for help. The gesture emergency educators taught children for moments when speaking was too dangerous, when predators were listening, when a camera might be the only witness. No one else reacted. The businessman 2 rows over kept reading his newspaper. The mother wrangling 2 toddlers didn't look up. The gate agent made another boarding announcement for a flight to Denver that no one seemed to hear, but Aaron Renard saw it, and the moment he did, everything else in the terminal, the noise, the movement, the hum of ordinary life continuing around him, fell away into background static. He knew the truth was far worse than it appeared. Aaron didn't believe in accidents. He believed in patterns, in the micro-movements people made when words became too dangerous, in the weight of silence that spoke louder than screaming ever could. At 38, he'd built an empire by reading what others overlooked, the nervous glance across a negotiation table, the hesitation before signing a contract, the moment someone decided whether to run or comply. The tattoos on his hands, partially visible beneath his cuffs as he typed, told one story to people who knew how to read them. The stillness in his dark eyes told another. He'd learned young that power wasn't about who shouted loudest, it was about who paid attention when everyone else looked away. The terminal hummed with its usual symphony of chaos, families dragging oversized luggage toward check-in counters, business people shouting into phones about missed connections, children crying over dropped snacks, gate agents making announcements no one fully heard. Overhead, the departure boards flickered and updated flights to Dallas, Miami, Seattle, Los Angeles. The air smelled like burnt coffee and cleaning solution, and the particular staleness that lived in spaces where thousands of strangers passed through without ever really arriving. Aaron moved through it all like smoke when he traveled dark suit that fit perfectly but didn't flash wealth. Leather messenger bag slung over one shoulder, posture relaxed but spine straight. dark hair slicked back in a style that belonged in boardrooms or expensive restaurants. To the mother wrestling a stroller past his seat, he was just another corporate traveler. To the TSA agent scanning the crowd near the security checkpoint, he was background noise. To the elderly couple asking a gate agent for directions, he was invisible. That's exactly how he preferred it. Men in his line of work stayed alive by being forgettable, by blending into crowds so seamlessly that witnesses couldn't describe them if asked. But beneath that carefully constructed anonymity lived something else. A system trained to detect predators, because Aaron Renard had spent 30 years in rooms with the worst humanity had to offer. He knew how monsters dressed. He knew how they smiled. He knew how they controlled victims without ever raising their voices. And the man sitting 3 seats away, looking for all the world like a concerned guardian helping an injured child through a difficult travel day, had every single tell. The girl's posture, the mechanical way she responded when he spoke to her, the fact that she hadn't made eye contact with anyone not once since Aaron had noticed her 20 minutes ago, the neck brace that looked like a prop, the bandage that seemed strategically placed to explain away questions. Aaron's fingers had stopped moving across his keyboard. The email to his attorney in Brooklyn could wait. The wire transfer confirmation for the shipping operation could wait. Everything could wait, because a child 3 seats away had just told him in the only language she had left that she needed help. His phone buzzed. Text message from his second-in-command about a shipment delay at the docks. Another message from his accountant about quarterly numbers that looked better than expected. A third from someone he'd have to deal with soon. Someone who'd made promises they couldn't keep. None of it mattered now. Aaron's gaze flicked back to the girl. She'd lowered her hand again, folded it back into her lap. Her eyes stayed down. The man beside her hadn't noticed anything. He was still scrolling through his phone, thumb moving in that mindless rhythm people adopted when killing time. An announcement crackled overhead. Attention passengers on Flight 437 to Chicago. We will begin boarding in approximately 15 minutes. The man glanced at the departure board, then at the girl. That's us, he said quietly. You ready? She nodded without speaking. No one else in the terminal looked twice, but Aaron couldn't look away. Aaron Renard had killed his first man at 19. The memory didn't haunt him the way people assumed it should. There were no nightmares, no sudden jolts of guilt in quiet moments. What haunted him instead was the moment just before the 30 seconds, when he'd known what was coming and had chosen not to walk away. That was the moment that defined everything after. The moment when he'd learned that power wasn't about pulling triggers, it was about deciding to act when everyone else pretended not to see. He closed his laptop slowly, deliberately, watching the girl and the man from his peripheral vision. Years of survival had taught him never to stare directly at a threat. Direct eye contact triggered defensive responses. People felt watched. They adjusted their behavior. Aaron needed to see them as they really were. The man stood first, reaching down to pick up a small black carry-on bag. Professional, unhurried. The movements of someone who'd done this before, someone who knew exactly how to navigate airports without attracting attention. He wasn't nervous, wasn't looking around for witnesses or cameras. That confidence was the most dangerous thing about him. The girl stood when he gestured, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that hesitation had consequences. She kept her eyes down, reaching for a small backpack at her feet, light blue, decorated with faded cartoon characters that seemed too young for her, like something chosen by someone who didn't actually know what 11-year-old girls liked. Aaron watched the space between them. 6 inches. Close enough for control. Far enough to look appropriate. The man's hand moved to the small of her back as they walked toward the gate, guiding her. To everyone else, it looked protective, a guardian making sure a child with a neck injury didn't stumble in the crowded terminal. But Aaron saw the pressure in that touch, the way her shoulders tensed infinitesimally when his fingers made contact. She'd been trained to move when directed, trained to stay quiet, trained to perform normal while everything inside her screamed for help. Aaron had seen it before in different contexts. Witnesses who knew better than to testify, dealers who understood the cost of cooperation, business partners who'd learned that certain questions didn't get asked. Control didn't require chains, it required conditioning. And this man had conditioned her so thoroughly that even her distress signal had been nearly invisible. A half-second gesture born of desperate hope rather than expectation. She hadn't believed anyone would see it, but she'd made it anyway. That was the part that lodged itself somewhere behind Aaron's ribs, in a place he'd thought had calcified years ago. He stood, slipping his laptop into his messenger bag with practiced efficiency. His gate was 3 down from theirs. He'd noted it the moment he'd sat down, the same way he noted every exit, every security camera angle, every person within a 20-foot radius who might present a problem. His flight to Boston didn't board for another 40 minutes, but that didn't matter. Timing was everything. Aaron's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen. 6 messages now, each one representing a piece of the empire that functioned whether he was present or not. Shipping manifests. Payment confirmations. Territory disputes that needed his attention before they escalated into the kind of violence that attracted federal interest. He'd built his organization on a simple principle: be the person people feared to disappoint, not through brutality that was inefficient, messy, the mark of men who mistook volume for authority. Aaron's power came from precision, from knowing exactly where pressure needed to be applied and how much force would break someone without leaving visible marks. His childhood had been a masterclass in invisible violence. His father had never raised his voice, never had to. The threat lived in silence, in the space between words, in the way he could make a room feel suffocating just by entering it. Aaron's mother had learned not to flinch, not to react, not to give him the satisfaction of visible fear. She'd taught Aaron the same lesson: how to disappear inside himself, how to read danger before it announced itself, how to survive by becoming whatever the moment required. She died when Aaron was 12. Heart attack, the doctors said. Stress, they suggested carefully, in the way doctors did when they suspected but couldn't prove. No one had investigated further. No one had asked the right questions. People had noticed: neighbors, teachers, the woman from child services who'd shown up once and left satisfied with his father's explanations. But noticing wasn't the same as acting, and in the end, everyone had decided that what happened in their house wasn't their problem. Aaron had learned the lesson well. The world only helped people who could scream loud enough to be heard, and some people had been taught that screaming only made things worse. He watched the girl disappear into the boarding line, the man's hand still resting on her back. Watched how she moved, small steps, controlled breathing visible even from 20 feet away, the posture of someone conserving energy because she didn't know when she'd need to survive the next thing. Aaron could walk away, should walk away. This wasn't his world. He trafficked in money and influence and strategic violence. Not whatever nightmare this child was living through. Getting involved meant exposure, questions, attention he couldn't afford. His organization thrived in shadows. Heroes operated in daylight, and Aaron Renard was not a hero, but he also wasn't the kind of man who ignored patterns. The girl's neck brace was too clean, the bandage too deliberately placed, the man's documentation too perfect. Aaron had spent 20 years identifying people who built believable lies, and this was a professional operation, the kind where someone had thought through every detail, anticipated every question, created a story that would satisfy casual observation, which meant authorities would be useless. The system required evidence, required complaints, required victims willing to speak, and witnesses willing to testify. This girl had been trained to provide none of those things. If Aaron called airport security now, she'd recite whatever story she'd been taught. The man would produce documentation that checked out. They'd board their flight and disappear into whatever hell waited on the other side. And Aaron would spend the rest of his life knowing he'd let it happen. His jaw tightened. He pulled his phone from his pocket, opened an encrypted messaging app, and typed 4 words to his head of security. Need deep background. Urgent. Then he took a photo, subtle, angled to look like he was checking his messages, capturing the man's profile as he handed boarding passes to the gate agent. Aaron believed in patterns, believed in the weight of a glance, in the space between words where truth lived and lies died. And he believed that some decisions defined you more than others. This was one of them. The gate agent was young, mid-20s, with the kind of practiced smile that came from repeating the same phrases 500 times a day. She scanned the boarding passes, glanced at the man's ID, then looked down at the girl. "And how are you feeling today, sweetheart?" Her voice had that sing-song quality adults used with children they didn't actually know. "That neck brace looks uncomfortable." The girl's response came so quickly it couldn't have been natural. "I'm okay. It doesn't hurt too much anymore." 6 words, delivered with just enough inflection to sound believable, just enough eye contact to seem genuine, just enough of a small smile to suggest resilience rather than fear. It was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of answer that had been rehearsed until it became automatic, a script activated by specific triggers. Aaron stood 15 feet away, pretending to check his phone while every nerve in his body focused on that exchange. "Oh, that's good," the gate agent said, her smile widening. "You're very brave. What happened?" The man stepped in before the girl could answer, his voice warm with manufactured concern. "Car accident last week. Minor, thank God, but the doctor wanted her to keep the brace on for another few days. Kids heal fast, but we're not taking any chances." "Of course not." The agent's expression shifted to sympathy. "Well, you two have a safe flight. Feel better soon, honey." The girl nodded. Still smiling, still performing, they moved down the jetway, disappearing into the aircraft. Aaron's hand tightened around his phone. The story was airtight. Concerned guardian, injured child, medical documentation that would check out if anyone bothered to verify it, which they wouldn't. Because nothing about this situation triggered the alarm systems airports were designed to catch. There was no shouting, no visible distress, no obvious indicators of danger. Just a man traveling with a child who had a plausible explanation for every detail that might raise questions. The system was designed to catch bombs and weapons and people on watch lists. It wasn't designed to catch this. Aaron's phone vibrated. Response from his security chief, a man named Tobias, who'd spent 15 years in military intelligence before Aaron had recruited him with money and the promise of interesting problems to solve. "Photo facial rec running now. Manifest data?" Aaron typed back. "Flight 437 to Chicago. Male 45 to 50, traveling with minor female. Need full background within the hour." Understood. Aaron knew what Tobias would find: layers of documentation, probably legitimate enough to pass standard background checks. Maybe even a foster care license or guardianship papers. Men who operated at this level didn't rely on fake IDs and forged documents. They used the system itself, understanding that the best cover was legality. He moved closer to the gate, watching through the jetway windows as passengers filed onto the plane. The girl would be seated by now, buckled in, trapped for the next 2 hours in a tube at 30,000 feet, with no exits and no witnesses who'd understand what they were seeing, even if she tried to signal again. A family pushed past him, parents juggling a diaper bag and a toddler, the mother already looking exhausted before the flight had even boarded. Normal people with normal problems, the kind of stress that came from managing everyday chaos rather than surviving systematic harm. Aaron had never had a normal life, had never pretended to want one. Normal people built lives around mortgages and soccer practice and retirement plans. Aaron built his around power structures and leverage points, and knowing exactly where to apply pressure to make entire organizations bend to his will. But standing here, watching a little girl disappear into a situation he couldn't immediately control, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Helplessness. He could call airport security right now. Could pull rank using connections that reached into federal law enforcement. Could manufacture a reason for that plane to be held, for those passengers to be delayed, for that man to be questioned, and it would accomplish nothing. The girl would deny everything. She'd been trained to. Her responses were automatic now, embedded so deeply that even under pressure she'd perform exactly as she'd been taught. The man would present documentation. Airport security would find nothing actionable. And afterward, when they were released and allowed to continue their journey, that man would know someone had noticed. He'd know the girl had signaled. And whatever consequences waited for her would be worse than anything Aaron's intervention had prevented. That was the trap. The same trap that had kept Aaron's mother silent for years. The same trap that had taught Aaron at 12 years old that sometimes the system designed to protect people was actually the thing that kept them imprisoned. Because calling for help required believing help would come. And when help didn't come, or worse, when it came and failed, the message was clear. You're on your own, and trying to escape only makes it worse. Aaron's boarding group was called. He moved toward the gate with the rest of the passengers, his mind already 3 steps ahead. Chicago wasn't a dead end. Chicago was information. Once he knew where they were going after they landed, he could position resources, establish surveillance, build a complete picture of who this man was and what infrastructure supported him. This wasn't a random predator. Random predators were sloppy, impulsive, easy to identify because their patterns were chaos. This was organized, professional, which meant there were others involved, people who provided documentation, covered tracks, created the legal framework that made this appear legitimate. An operation this clean required money and connections. Aaron had both. And he had something else most people lacked, the willingness to operate outside every system that had failed this girl. He handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, a different one now. Older, less interested in small talk. She scanned it without looking up. "Thank you, Mr. Renard. Enjoy your flight." He moved down the jetway, the walls narrowing around him, the mechanical hum of the aircraft growing louder. First class, seat 2A. He'd be off the plane quickly when they landed, able to move before the rest of the passengers clogged the terminal. As Aaron stepped onto the aircraft, he caught a glimpse of the girl 3 rows back in economy. She sat by the window, staring out at nothing. The man sat in the aisle seat, already absorbed in his phone. She looked small. Alone despite not being alone. Aaron found his seat, stored his bag, and settled in with the practiced efficiency of someone who flew 100 times a year. The flight attendant offered him water. He accepted, buckled his seatbelt, pulled out his phone to set it to airplane mode. One last message to Tobias before the signal died. "This isn't a request. Find everything." The response came immediately. Already on it. Aaron powered down his phone and looked out the window at the tarmac, at the normal machinery of air travel continuing its normal operations while something terrible sat 3 rows behind him, hidden in plain sight. He wasn't walking away, but he also wasn't calling the police. Some problems required different solutions. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and Aaron stared at the clouds outside his window, seeing nothing. Walking away would be easy. The thought arrived with the clarity of truth, undressed by justification or pretense. He could land in Chicago, head to his meeting with the construction union rep who'd been skimming money, handle his business, fly back to New York, and never think about the girl in seat 14B again. His life would continue its familiar trajectory, money flowing through accounts in 3 countries, territory disputes resolved with phone calls instead of bullets, power maintained through the careful architecture of fear and respect. No one would blame him. No one would even know he'd noticed. The rational part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive for 38 years, was already building the argument. He wasn't responsible for every child in danger. Couldn't be. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands, suffering in ways he'd never see and couldn't prevent. Getting involved meant exposure, risk, complications his organization couldn't afford. The FBI had been circling his operations for 2 years, looking for the one mistake that would give them leverage. Playing hero was exactly the kind of mistake that drew attention. And for what? One child he didn't know, in a situation he didn't fully understand, with variables he couldn't control. The flight attendant passed by offering drinks. Aaron asked for whiskey. Neat. She returned with it moments later. Maker's Mark, decent enough for 30,000 feet. He sipped it slowly, feeling the burn settle in his chest, trying to convince himself that logic mattered more than the image burned into his memory of a little girl's hand forming a shape no child should have to learn. But logic was losing. Because Aaron remembered being 7 years old and standing in the kitchen doorway watching his father's hand close around his mother's wrist. Not hard enough to leave marks. Never hard enough to leave marks. Just pressure, just control, just a reminder of who decided things in their house. His mother hadn't cried, hadn't pulled away. She just stood there, frozen in that terrible stillness Aaron had later recognized in soldiers suffering from shell shock, in hostages after ransom negotiations, in people whose survival depended on becoming less than human. Aaron had stood in that doorway for maybe 10 seconds before his father noticed him. "Go to your room." He'd gone. Of course he'd gone. He was 7, but he remembered thinking someone should do something, should call someone, should make it stop. The next day at school, his teacher had asked if everything was okay at home. Mrs. Patterson, young and earnest, the kind of teacher who actually gave a damn. Aaron remembered her concerned expression, the way she'd crouched down to his eye level in the hallway, the gentleness in her voice that had made something crack inside his carefully constructed armor. He could have told her the truth. Could have described the fear that lived in every room of his house, the way his mother flinched at sudden sounds, the night he'd heard crying through the walls and knew better than to investigate. Instead, he'd looked Mrs. Patterson in the eye and said, "Everything's fine." 3 words, delivered with just enough conviction to end the conversation. She'd believed him because it was easier than not believing him, because investigating further meant paperwork and phone calls, and getting involved in something messy and complicated. Because children lied to protect their parents, everyone knew that, and maybe she'd been wrong about the signs she'd noticed. She'd let it go, and Aaron had learned that adults, even the ones who claimed to care, would choose comfort over truth every single time. 4 years later, his mother was dead, and Aaron had stood at her funeral understanding with perfect clarity that Mrs. Patterson's moment of hesitation, that split second when she'd decided not to push harder, had been exactly as fatal as his father's hands. The whiskey in Aaron's glass caught the overhead reading light, amber liquid trembling slightly with the aircraft's vibration. He drained it. He could still walk away, could land in Chicago, disappear into the terminal, let the girl and her captor fade into the background noise of his criminal enterprise. No one would ever know he'd been the person who saw her signal and chosen to do nothing, except he'd know. And that was the problem with memory. It didn't care about logic or self-preservation or the 100 rational reasons why involvement was a mistake. Memory just replayed moments on an endless loop, showing you who you'd been and asking if you'd learned anything since. Aaron pulled out his phone, turned off airplane mode long enough to check messages despite the flight attendant's announcements. The connection was weak but present. 2 new messages from Tobias. The first was clinical. Facial recognition hit. Robert Kieran, 47, Chicago resident, foster care license active, 3 placements in last 2 years, all girls aged 9 to 12. Clean background check. No priors. The second message was shorter. Too clean. Running deeper. Aaron's jaw tightened. Foster care license. That was the infrastructure he'd suspected legal cover wrapped around something dark enough that it needed covering. Men like Kieran understood that the best predators operated inside systems designed to protect children, because those systems granted access and authority, while simultaneously making accusations difficult to prove. Foster children had already been failed by someone's parents, relatives, circumstances. They were vulnerable by definition, damaged, easy to manipulate because they'd learned young that adults couldn't be trusted, and fighting back only made things worse. Perfect victims. Aaron's hands curled into fists on the armrests. He thought about his mother's funeral, the things people had said. She's at peace now. She's in a better place. At least she's not suffering anymore. All the comfortable platitudes people told themselves when faced with uncomfortable truths. No one had said what they all knew. She'd been murdered slowly over years, and they'd all watched it happen. Aaron turned in his seat, looking back through the gap between headrests. He could just see the girl, 3 rows back. She hadn't moved since takeoff. Hadn't asked for anything, hadn't shifted position, hadn't done any of the restless things children typically did on planes. She just sat, staring at the seat back in front of her, existing in that terrible stillness he recognized too well. Robert Kieran sat beside her, scrolling through something on his tablet, completely relaxed. Why wouldn't he be? He'd done this before, would do it again. The system protected him, documentation validated him, and the girl in his care had been trained not to fight back. Aaron could walk away, could pretend he'd never noticed, could prioritize his own survival over a stranger's suffering, the way countless people had done throughout history when choosing courage meant risking something valuable. But then he'd be Mrs. Patterson, wouldn't he? Standing in a hallway years from now, metaphorically speaking, wondering if things might have been different, if he'd just pushed a little harder, if he'd chosen truth over comfort, if he'd decided one child's life mattered more than his own convenience. The plane descended through clouds, Chicago emerging below concrete and steel, and millions of lives intersecting without collision. Anonymous, safe in their anonymity. Aaron made his decision. He'd stopped being 7 years old a long time ago. The plane touched down at O'Hare at 4:47 p.m., 18 minutes ahead of schedule. Aaron was out of his seat before the seatbelt sign chimed off, moving with the purposeful efficiency of someone who traveled too often to waste time. He didn't look back at row 14. Didn't need to. Robert Kieran and the girl would deplane with everyone else, and Aaron would be 3 steps ahead by then. His phone powered on as he strode through the jetway. Notifications flooding in messages, emails, the constant pulse of an empire that required feeding. He ignored all of it, except the string of texts from Tobias. The first message made him slow his pace. Kieran's foster placements. First girl, Maya Rodriguez, 9, placed 8 months ago. Lasted 6 weeks. Removed by state after behavioral issues. Currently in group home. Second message. Second girl, Jennifer Park, 11, placed 4 months ago. Lasted 3 weeks. Returned to state care. Cited inability to adjust to household structure. Third message. Current placement. Lily Simon, 11, in Kieran's care for 7 weeks. No incident reports filed. Aaron's jaw clenched as he moved through the terminal, weaving between slower travelers with the predatory grace that had earned him his reputation. 7 weeks. long enough to establish control, long enough to break down whatever resistance a traumatized child might have had. The pattern was clear now, obvious in the way only hindsight made things obvious. Kieran cycled through foster children quickly, discarding them once they became too difficult to manage or too likely to speak up. The system marked it as failed placements, natural incompatibility, the unfortunate reality that not every match worked out. No one looked deeper, because no one wanted to find what looking deeper might reveal. Aaron reached the main terminal and positioned himself near a column with clear sightlines to the arrival gates. Passengers from his flight began streaming past the family with the toddler, the businessman who'd sat across the aisle, the elderly woman who'd needed help with her bag. Normal people returning to normal lives, completely unaware that something monstrous had traveled among them. Then he saw them. Kieran emerged from the gate with Lily slightly behind him, his hand resting on her shoulder with that same practiced guidance that looked protective from any angle. They moved toward baggage claim, blending seamlessly into the crowd. Aaron followed at a distance, 40 feet back, using other travelers as cover while maintaining visual contact. His phone buzzed. Tobias again. Tracked Kieran's vehicle registration. 2019. Honda CR-V, silver. Parked in Economy Lot C, Section 4B. License plate Alpha Hotel, 732 Mike, Quebec. Aaron typed back with one hand while walking. Current location of previous placements. The response came within seconds. Both still in state system. Addresses attached. Flagging something else, Kieran's bank records show regular deposits. $2,500 monthly, source coded as consultant fees from LLC registered in Delaware. Shell company, can't trace owner yet. Aaron's mind assembled the pieces with the cold precision he applied to criminal enterprises. This wasn't just a predator operating alone. Someone was paying Kieran. Which meant there was infrastructure, financial backing, legal protection, possibly others involved in procurement or distribution. This was organized, which meant it could be dismantled, but not by going to police. The Chicago field office would require evidence, search warrants, probable cause, testimony from victims who'd been trained to recant. Even if Aaron could convince them to investigate, unlikely. Given his own criminal status, the process would take weeks, months. And Kieran would vanish the moment he sensed official scrutiny, taking Lily with him into whatever network had backed his operation. No. This required a different approach. Aaron watched Kieran and Lily reach the baggage carousel, standing apart from the other passengers. Kieran checked his phone. Lily stood motionless, staring at nothing. That terrible stillness Aaron had seen on the plane, persisting even now in the bustle of baggage claim. Another message from Tobias. Getting vehicle tracking device to your location. Courier 10 minutes out. Black sedan, north exit. Aaron moved toward the exit, keeping Kieran in his peripheral vision. The baggage claim's fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh relief. Tired travelers, crying children, the mechanical grind of luggage carousels, ordinary misery, the kind everyone tolerated because it was temporary. Lily's misery wasn't temporary, unless Aaron made it so. He stepped outside into Chicago's autumn air, cooler than New York had been, the smell of jet fuel mixing with exhaust from taxis and ride-shares crowding the pickup lanes. His courier arrived exactly on schedule, a black Mercedes sedan that pulled to the curb with practiced precision. The driver's window lowered. Mr. Renard. The courier was young, maybe 25, with the alert eyes of former military. Another of Tobias's recruits. GPS tracker, adhesive mount, battery life 14 days. Magnetic case for vehicle undercarriage. Good. Aaron took the small device no bigger than a credit card, slim enough to hide in a palm. Wait here. I may need transport. Yes, sir. Aaron returned inside, moving through the terminal's current of humanity, until he found a position near the elevator banks that led to the parking structures. Kieran and Lily appeared 5 minutes later, Kieran pulling a single rolling suitcase while Lily carried her small backpack. They entered an elevator marked economy parking. Aaron took the next one up. The economy lot stretched across 3 levels of concrete and exhaust-stained pillars. Aaron emerged on level C, section 4B, and spotted the silver CR-V immediately 3rd row, end space, chosen for quick exit. Kieran's tactical thinking. He understood how to minimize exposure. Aaron approached from the blind side, phone to his ear as though on a business call. Just another traveler, dealing with just another crisis, that couldn't wait until he got home. He walked past the CRV, paused beside it as though checking something on his phone, and in one smooth motion pressed the GPS tracker against the undercarriage near the rear wheel well. The magnetic mount clicked softly. Invisible unless someone knew to look. He kept walking, circling back through an adjacent row until he found a position with clear sightlines. 2 minutes later, Kieran and Lily reached the vehicle. Kieran loaded the suitcase in the back while Lily climbed into the rear passenger seat, buckling herself in with mechanical precision. The CRV pulled out, navigating the parking structure's turns and exits. Aaron was already moving toward his courier's Mercedes. "Follow the silver Honda," he said, sliding into the back seat. "Stay 3 cars back. Don't lose them." "Understood." They merged into O'Hare's departure traffic, the CRV visible ahead in the stream of brake lights and turn signals. Aaron's phone buzzed continuously, messages from his attorney, his accountant, his lieutenant handling the union situation. He ignored them all, focus narrowing to a single objective. Find where Kieran lived. Find where Lily was being kept. Find every pressure point in this man's carefully constructed life. This wasn't rescue yet. This was reconnaissance. The difference between amateurs and professionals was patience, the willingness to gather intelligence, identify vulnerabilities, build leverage before making a move. Aaron had built an empire on patience, and he was about to use every lesson that empire had taught him. The CRV headed west on I-90, away from the city center, toward suburbs that sprawled in neat grids of residential streets and shopping centers. Normal neighborhoods, the kind where people mowed lawns and walked dogs and never suspected what lived 3 houses down. Aaron's courier maintained distance, professional and invisible. They drove for 23 minutes before the CRV took an exit toward a town called Schaumburg. Subdivision streets, 2-story homes with attached garages, the comfortable anonymity of middle-class America. The CRV turned into a driveway. 847 Maple Ridge Court, a beige house with brown shutters, neatly trimmed lawn, a basketball hoop in the driveway. It looked exactly like every other house on the block. Perfect camouflage. "Drive past," Aaron instructed. "Circle the block. I want to see the full property." The courier complied. Aaron noted everything: the fence line, the neighboring houses, the sight lines from the street, the lack of visible security cameras. Kieran felt safe here, comfortable, protected by normalcy and the system's willful blindness. That was about to change. Aaron's phone was already open, fingers moving across the encrypted messaging app. Target location confirmed. Need full surveillance package, property records, utility usage patterns, security system details, everything. Tobias responded immediately. 6 hours. Aaron leaned back against the leather seat, watching the subdivision roll past. Somewhere in that beige house with brown shutters, Lily Simon was entering her prison for another night, another day, another week unless someone stopped it. Aaron intended to be that someone, but not yet. Not until he knew every variable, every risk, every possible outcome. Predators like Kieran thrived because they understood systems. Aaron was about to teach him what happened when someone understood systems better. 36 hours later, Aaron sat in a rental car parked 2 blocks from 847 Maple Ridge Court, watching surveillance feeds on a tablet that showed 4 different angles of Kieran's property. Tobias had delivered everything: property records showing Kieran owned the house outright, utility patterns indicating 2 occupants, the absence of a security system beyond basic door locks, neighbors who kept to themselves, a landscaping service that came Thursdays, a mail carrier who delivered at 2 p.m., and most importantly, Kieran's routine. Morning drop-off at Fairfield Elementary, where Lily was enrolled in 6th grade. Kieran worked from home. The shell company that paid him listed his address as its office. Afternoon pickup at 3:15 p.m. Groceries on Tuesdays. Everything scheduled, controlled, predictable. Predators loved routines. Routines meant control. Aaron was about to use that control against him. His phone displayed the background Tobias had compiled. Robert Kieran. Never married. No children of his own. He worked in insurance claims for 15 years before becoming a consultant. The foster license had been approved 18 months ago. 3 placements, all girls, all removed before anyone asked the questions that mattered. Bank records showed deposits from the Delaware LLC, plus occasional cash deposits that never quite triggered reporting thresholds. Smart, careful, systematic, but not careful enough. Aaron had also learned about the previous girls. Maya Rodriguez wouldn't speak to investigators Tobias had contacted through intermediaries. Jennifer Park had tried once to tell a social worker something was wrong, But without specific details and with Kieran's spotless record, the complaint had been noted and dismissed. Both girls were marked as difficult placements in the system. The pattern was clear. Kieran exploited the gap between suspicion and proof, operating in the space where evidence was scarce, and children were already traumatized enough that their testimony seemed unreliable. It was brilliant, in a horrifying way. And it was about to end. Aaron checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. Kieran would leave to pick up Lily in 23 minutes, which meant Aaron had a narrow window. He stepped out of the rental car, a nondescript Toyota Camry that belonged to everyone and no one, and walked casually toward Maple Ridge Court. Dark jeans, black jacket, the kind of outfit that wouldn't register in anyone's memory. He'd learned years ago that being forgettable was more valuable than being intimidating. The afternoon was quiet. Most neighbors were at work. A landscaping crew worked 3 houses down, the sound of leaf blowers providing useful cover. Aaron approached Kieran's house from the side, moving along the fence line until he reached the back door. The lock was standard residential grade. Aaron had it open in 45 seconds. Inside, the house was exactly what he'd expected: clean, organized, designed to pass any inspection a social worker might conduct. Living room with comfortable furniture. Kitchen with fresh fruit in a bowl on the counter. Photographs on the walls showing Kieran at charity events, volunteer activities, all the props of a man committed to helping children. Aaron moved through the house methodically, photographing everything with a camera designed to avoid digital fingerprints. The guest bedroom where Lily slept had educational posters on the walls, a shelf of age-appropriate books, a desk with homework assignments neatly stacked. It looked perfect, too perfect. Aaron opened the closet, found the lock on the inside of the door that could only be operated from outside, found the window that had been sealed shut and painted over, found the monitoring camera hidden in the smoke detector, angled to cover the entire room. His jaw clenched. The basement was worse. A second bedroom, this one without windows, soundproofed walls evident in the construction, a cabinet with medical supplies, sedatives, restraints, equipment that had no legitimate purpose, and a filing cabinet with records, photographs, documents, communications with others in whatever network funded this operation. Aaron photographed everything, his movements mechanical, professional, even as something cold and violent coiled in his chest. This wasn't just abuse. This was infrastructure, production, distribution. Kieran was a node in a network, and Lily was product. He checked his watch. 3:02 p.m. 13 minutes until Kieran left for pickup. Aaron moved to the home office, a small room with a desk, computer, filing cabinet. He installed a keylogger on the computer in under 2 minutes, then searched the desk, found a burner phone in a locked drawer, found a ledger with coded entries that would take time to decipher but clearly represented transactions, found a schedule. Lily's schedule. School days, evening activities, weekend routines, but also other notations. Session 1800 to 2000, Thu and delivery, Fry 2000, 200, and codes that Aaron recognized from his own criminal operations as the language of trafficking. His hands trembled slightly as he photographed the ledger. He'd seen violence, had ordered violence, had participated in violence when necessary for survival or control. But this systematic destruction of children was something different. Something that reached past the pragmatic brutality of his world into territory even career criminals recognized as beyond redemption. Aaron returned everything to its exact position, locked the drawer, and moved toward the front of the house. Through the window, he saw Kieran's CRV pull into the driveway, early. Aaron calculated distances and timing. The back door was 15 feet away. Kieran would come through the front, would walk through the living room, would notice if anything was disturbed. But Aaron had already decided this confrontation was happening today. He settled into the chair facing the front door and waited. Kieran entered alone. Lily would still be at school for another 10 minutes. He was looking at his phone, distracted, not expecting anyone to be inside his carefully secured space. He closed the door, turned toward the living room, and froze. Aaron sat completely still, hands visible, posture relaxed, non-threatening, which somehow made the moment more threatening. "Hello, Robert." Kieran's face went through a series of micro-expressions: confusion, fear, calculation, and finally a forced calm that spoke to years of practice controlling his reactions. "I don't know who you are," Kieran said carefully, "but you're making a serious mistake. I'm calling the police." No, you're not. Aaron's voice was quiet, conversational. Because the moment you do, I'll make a call of my own. And 30 seconds later, copies of everything in your basement filing cabinet will be emailed to the FBI, the Chicago PD, the State Foster Care Oversight Board, and 3 major news organizations. Kieran's hand, halfway to his phone, stopped moving. That's better. Aaron leaned forward slightly. I'm going to tell you how this is going to work. You're going to listen very carefully, because your life depends on understanding what I say next. Who are you? Someone who noticed. Aaron's eyes were flat, empty of anything resembling mercy. That little girl on the plane made a signal. Did you know that? Of course you didn't. You were too busy scrolling through your phone, confident that you'd trained her well enough that she wouldn't dare try anything. But she did try. And I saw it. Kieran's face drained of color. Here's what's going to happen, Aaron continued. You're going to go pick up Lily from school. You're going to bring her home, and then you're going to call your caseworker and tell them you can no longer provide care. Medical emergency, family crisis. I don't care what story you use, but by tomorrow morning, Lily Simon will be out of your house and in state custody. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Aaron's voice dropped lower, each word precise as a blade. I understand you're part of a network. I understand there are others involved, people who pay you, people who expect delivery. I understand all of it, Robert. And here's what you need to understand. I have everything. Every file. Every photograph. Every communication. Every transaction in that ledger you keep in your office drawer. Kieran's breathing had gone shallow. You have a choice, Aaron said. Walk away from this, from Lily, from whatever network you're part of, from all of it, and I'll let you disappear. Change your name, leave the state, start over somewhere else where no one knows what you are. Or refuse, and I'll destroy you so completely that you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell with people who know exactly what you did to children. They'll kill me, Kieran whispered. The people I work for, if I just walk away. That's not my problem. Aaron stood, buttoning his jacket. But I'll tell you this. I'm far more dangerous than whoever you're afraid of. Because they need you functional. I don't need you at all. He moved toward the door, then paused. You have 24 hours. Lily goes back into state care. Clean transfer. No incidents. If anything happens to her, if she's harmed, if she disappears, if there's any indication you've tried to run with her, I won't call the police. I'll handle it personally. And you'll discover that there are things worse than prison. Aaron opened the door and walked out into the suburban afternoon sunshine, leaving Robert Kieran standing paralyzed in his living room, finally understanding what it felt like to be trapped. 22 hours later, Aaron watched from his rental car as Robert Kieran's CRV pulled into the Department of Children and Family Services building on South Wabash Avenue. The building was gray, concrete, and administrative exhaustion, the kind of government structure that processed human suffering with forms and waiting rooms and overworked caseworkers who'd stopped believing they could save everyone. Kieran got out first. Then Lily, moving slowly, her small backpack clutched against her chest like a shield. Aaron's phone was connected to a contact inside DCFS, not someone on his payroll, but someone who owed Tobias a favor significant enough that questions weren't asked. The text came through as Kieran and Lily entered the building. They're here. Voluntary relinquishment. Kieran cited personal health crisis, unable to continue providing care. Caseworker processing now. Aaron exhaled slowly. The first domino had fallen, but this wasn't safety yet. This was just the absence of immediate danger, and Aaron had lived long enough to know those weren't the same thing. Lily was entering a system that had already failed her multiple times, the system that had placed her with Kieran in the first place, that had ignored warning signs from previous placements, that operated on paperwork and policy rather than the instinct required to recognize predators. His phone buzzed again. Transfer complete. Lily Simon remanded to state custody. Emergency placement at Morrison Group Home, Northwest Side. She'll be transported within the hour. Aaron started the car. He knew Morrison had researched every facility in Chicago's foster system during the 36 hours he'd spent planning Kieran's takedown. Morrison was mid-tier. Not the worst, not the best. Chronically underfunded and overcrowded, but generally safe. Lily would have her own bed, 3 meals a day, supervision, the basics of survival. But survival wasn't healing. He drove north through Chicago's afternoon traffic, following the route he knew the DCFS transport van would take. His contact had provided the exact timing, and Aaron positioned himself in a coffee shop across from Morrison Group home 40 minutes before Lily arrived. The building was a converted brownstone, 3 stories with bars on the first-floor windows, a small yard with equipment that had seen better decades. Through the window, Aaron could see children inside, some watching television, others doing homework at a communal table, the organized chaos of institutional care. The transport van arrived at 4:37 p.m. A caseworker emerged, first young woman, late 20s, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who'd processed too many cases today. Then Lily, still in her gray hoodie and neck brace, still carrying that same small backpack. She looked impossibly small standing on the sidewalk, staring up at the building that would be her home for however long the system took to find something more permanent. The caseworker said something, gesturing toward the door. Lily nodded but didn't move. Just stood there, frozen, as though her body had decided that if she didn't take another step, none of this would be real. Aaron watched from across the street, his coffee untouched on the table in front of him. The caseworker placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, gentle, professional, the practiced touch of someone who dealt with traumatized children daily. Lily flinched. The caseworker didn't seem to notice, or perhaps had noticed so many flinches that they'd stopped registering as significant. They went inside. Aaron sat in that coffee shop for another 3 hours, watching the brownstone as afternoon faded into evening. Lights came on in the windows. Dinner happened. Children moved between rooms. The mundane machinery of institutional care continued its operations. At 7:45 p.m., his DCFS contact sent another message. Intake complete. Medical eval scheduled for tomorrow. Therapist appointment Friday. She's been assigned a room on the 2nd floor, shared with one other girl. Didn't speak during processing. Caseworker noted, significant trauma presentation. Aaron typed back. Her belongings? What she came with. Backpack. Couple changes of clothes. Nothing else. Aaron closed his eyes briefly. 11 years old, and everything she owned fit in a backpack. The arithmetic of abandonment calculated in pounds of possessions. He left the coffee shop and walked 3 blocks to a Target, moved through the aisles with purpose, selecting items with the same precision he applied to criminal operations. Clothing in what he estimated was Lily's size, toiletries, a new backpack with a design that seemed age-appropriate, books, art supplies, a stuffed animal that sat on a shelf looking less institutional than the others. At the register, the cashier, a teenager working an evening shift, rang up the items with practiced disinterest, then paused at the stuffed animal, a small gray elephant with embroidered details. "This is really cute," she said, making conversation. "Birthday present?" "Something like that," Aaron replied. He paid cash, carried the bags back to his car, and drove to a shipping store that stayed open late. Boxed everything carefully, addressed it to Morrison Group home with attention to Lily Simon, and paid for next-day delivery. The clerk accepted the package without comment. Just another box, another delivery, another transaction in a city that processed millions of them daily. Aaron returned to his car and sat in the parking lot, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. He'd done it, extracted Lily from immediate danger, applied pressure precisely where needed, used leverage and fear to dismantle Kieran's operation without violence or police involvement. It had been efficient, professional, the kind of strategic intervention his organization excelled at. So why did it feel incomplete? Because she was still afraid, he realized. Still alone. Still trapped in a system that would process her trauma through therapy appointments and case reviews and placement assessments, while missing the fundamental truth. She was a child who'd learned the world was dangerous, and adults were threats, and asking for help only made things worse. The neck brace was fake, but the injury wasn't. It just wasn't physical. Aaron's phone rang. Tobias. "Kieran's on the move," his security chief said without preamble. "Left his house 30 minutes ago with 2 suitcases, headed east on I-90. Looks like he's taking your advice. Track him until he leaves Illinois. Make sure he keeps going." "Already on it. Also, we decrypted more of that ledger. You were right about the network. Kieran was one node in something bigger. At least 4 other handlers in the Midwest, coordination through encrypted communications, money flowing from offshore accounts. This is organized." Aaron had expected this, but confirmation still settled like lead in his stomach. How many children? Unknown. Based on financial patterns and placement records we could access? Dozens over the past 3 years. Dozens. The word echoed in Aaron's mind. Dozens of children cycled through placements, abused, discarded, marked as difficult by a system designed to protect them. "Do we have names?" Aaron asked. "Locations? Working on it. Could take weeks to piece together." "Take the time. I want everything." "Understood. What about Kieran?" Aaron watched the lights of Chicago through his windshield, thinking about the man currently fleeing east, believing he'd escaped consequences. "Once he's out of state, make sure the FBI receives an anonymous tip. Include enough evidence to start an investigation, but nothing that traces back to us. He'll talk. Give up the network. That's the point. Let the system handle what it's designed to handle. We'll handle the rest." Tobias was quiet for a moment. "This isn't our usual business." "No," Aaron agreed. "It's not. Why her? Why this one?" It was a fair question. Aaron had witnessed countless crimes, ignored most of them, participated in some. His empire was built on moral compromise and strategic violence. Saving one child didn't align with anything his organization stood for. But he remembered being 7 years old in a doorway, remembered his teacher's moment of hesitation, remembered his mother's funeral and the comfortable platitudes. "Because someone had to," Aaron said finally, "and I was the one who saw." He ended the call and drove back toward his hotel, the Chicago skyline glittering in the distance. Somewhere in that city, Lily Simon was falling asleep in an unfamiliar bed, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds, in a place that promised safety without guaranteeing it. Tomorrow, a package would arrive. Small comfort in the arithmetic of trauma, insufficient compensation for what had been taken from her, but it was something. And Aaron had learned that sometimes something was where healing began, not in grand gestures or complete solutions, but in the accumulation of small proofs that maybe, possibly, the world contained people who noticed suffering and chose to act, even if those people were the last ones anyone expected to care. 3 days after Lily's placement at Morrison Group Home, Aaron received a call from his DCFS contact at 6:47 a.m. He was already awake, sitting in his hotel room reviewing financial reports that should have demanded his full attention but didn't. "She's not talking," the contact said. "Medical evaluation found old injuries consistent with restraint and confinement. Therapist tried 2 sessions. Lily just sits there, completely silent. Won't even confirm her own name." Aaron set down the report. "Is she eating?" "Barely. Picks at food. Doesn't interact with other kids. Just sits in her room staring at the wall." A pause. "She kept the elephant, though, from that package you sent. Sleeps with it every night." Something tightened in Aaron's chest. "What do the doctors say?" "Severe trauma. Trust issues. Possible selective mutism. They're recommending intensive therapy, but that takes time, and funding the state doesn't have. She'll probably get 1 session per week if she's lucky. Standard protocol for the system. Standard protocol." The words tasted like ash. "Keep me informed," Aaron said. "Will do. And thank you. For whatever you did to get her out of Kieran's house. I've seen the preliminary reports. What that man was doing." The contact's voice faltered. "People like you don't usually care about people like her." Aaron ended the call without responding to that. People like you. As if caring had a demographic, a profile, a set of qualifications. As if morality operated on a balance sheet where enough sins on one side negated any good on the other. He stood, walked to the window overlooking Chicago's morning traffic. Somewhere in this city, Lily was waking up in a group home, surrounded by strangers, still wearing the psychological armor that had kept her alive in Kieran's house. That armor wouldn't come off easily, might never come off completely. Aaron understood that. Had his own armor, forged in a different kind of hell but serving the same purpose. His phone buzzed with business that couldn't wait, a shipment delayed at the port, a territory dispute in Brooklyn requiring his attention, the construction union representative finally ready to negotiate. Real life, demanding he return to it, demanding he remember that saving one child didn't change who he was or what he'd built his life around. But something had shifted. He couldn't name it precisely, couldn't point to a specific moment when the shift had occurred. Maybe it was watching Lily make that signal on the plane, her hand moving in desperate hope that someone would understand. Maybe it was confronting Kieran and seeing fear in the eyes of a man who'd thought himself untouchable. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just the recognition that power meant nothing if it only served power. Aaron made a decision. He called Tobias. "The network Kieran was part of. You said there were other handlers. At least 4 confirmed. Possibly more. I want locations. Full surveillance packages on each one. Everything we did for Kieran, replicate it." Silence on the other end. Then, that's a significant resource commitment. We're talking weeks of investigative work, personnel allocation, expenses that don't generate revenue. I'm aware. This isn't our business. It is now. Aaron's voice carried the tone that ended discussions. You have your orders. Understood. I'll need authorization to bring in additional contractors. You have it. Whatever you need. This is priority 1. Another pause. The organization won't understand this. Using resources for something that doesn't benefit the bottom line. Then I'll explain it to them. Aaron looked out at the city, at the anonymous buildings housing anonymous suffering. We operate in shadows because the system doesn't reach there. Fine, but that means we see things the system misses. And what we see, we can choose to act on. Is this about the girl? This is about the fact that we have power and they don't. That's reason enough. He ended the call and immediately made another. This one to a lawyer he kept on retainer for legitimate business estate planning, corporate structures, the legal framework that made his less legitimate business possible. I need to establish a trust, Aaron said. Anonymous donor. Funds allocated for a specific minor currently in DCFS custody. Name is Lily Simon. The trust should cover private therapy, educational expenses, medical care, anything the state won't adequately provide. How much are we talking about? Start with $500,000. Structure it so the funds become available incrementally as she ages, with provisions for emergency access if needed. I want professional trustees managing it. No connection to me. That's unusually generous. Can you do it or not? I can do it. It'll take a few days to structure properly, ensure anonymity, establish the legal protections. Do it. Aaron spent the rest of the morning handling the business he'd been neglecting: conference calls with lieutenants, reviewing financial statements, authorizing payments and shipments, and the 1,000 small decisions that kept his empire functioning. By noon, he'd cleared enough immediate concerns that he could return to New York without everything collapsing in his absence. But he didn't book a flight. Instead, he drove back to Morrison Group home, parking across the street where he'd sat 3 days earlier. The brownstone looked the same: institutional, weary, trying its best with insufficient resources. Through the windows, he could see children moving through their afternoon routines, homework, chores, the structured existence of state care. He didn't see Lily. At 3:30 p.m., his DCFS contact sent a message. Update: Lily had her second therapy session this morning. Still not speaking, but therapist noted she's begun drawing. Dark imagery, concerning content, but it's communication. That's progress. Aaron read the message twice. Drawing. Communication through images instead of words, because words had been trained out of her, made dangerous, associated with punishment rather than help. He thought about his own childhood silence, the years he'd spent perfecting the art of revealing nothing because revelation meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant more damage than he'd already sustained. Lily was learning the same survival skills he'd learned, which meant she'd carry the same scars. Unless someone interrupted that trajectory, Aaron wasn't a therapist, wasn't qualified to heal trauma or teach trust or undo the damage Kieran had inflicted. But he was qualified to remove obstacles, to apply resources where they were needed, to use power for something beyond maintaining power. He started the car and drove away from Morrison Group home, leaving Lily to her institutional afternoon, but carrying the weight of a promise he'd made to himself. This wouldn't be where her story ended. He'd extracted her from immediate danger, had dismantled the threat, had established financial resources for her future. Now came the harder part, ensuring that future was worth living. The flight back to New York left at 7. Aaron made it with an hour to spare, settling into first class with the same laptop he'd been working on when this had all started. When a little girl's hand had moved in a pattern no one else had noticed, everything had changed in that moment, and Aaron was beginning to understand that some changes couldn't be undone and shouldn't be. The coffee shop in Brooklyn was Aaron's preferred meeting location for business that required discretion but not secrecy. Neutral territory, public enough to prevent certain kinds of problems, busy enough that conversations disappeared into ambient noise. He sat by the window, reviewing quarterly reports on a tablet, when Tobias arrived carrying a folder that looked thicker than usual. Updates on the network, Tobias said, sliding into the opposite seat. Took 18 months, but we've systematically dismantled 4 operations similar to Kieran's. FBI prosecutions pending on 6 individuals, 3 already convicted. Estimated 23 children extracted from dangerous placements. Aaron nodded, not looking up from his tablet. Casualties? Minimal. 2 of the handlers tried to run, didn't make it far. 1 attempted to harm a child before apprehension. We intervened before contact occurred. Good. There's something else. Tobias opened the folder, slid a photograph across the table. Thought you'd want to see this. Aaron looked at the image. It took him a moment to recognize her. Lily Simon. Not 11 anymore. 16 now, based on the timeline. Standing in what appeared to be a school hallway, smiling, actually smiling at someone off camera. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a braid. No neck brace, no bandage. No oversized hoodie hiding her from the world. She looked like a teenager. Normal. Alive in ways that went beyond breathing. Where did you get this? Aaron asked quietly. She has a social media presence now. Not extensive. Privacy settings are solid, but enough to track general well-being. She was adopted 2 years ago by a family in Minneapolis. Teacher and a social worker. No other children in the home. By all accounts, stable placement. Aaron studied the photograph, searching for signs of the child he'd seen on that plane. The stillness, the fear, the practiced invisibility. He couldn't find them. Either she'd healed enough to hide them, or they'd actually begun to fade. She's in therapy, Tobias continued. Advocate assigned through the trust you established. Grades are good. She joined an art club at her school, teaches a self-defense class for younger kids through a community center. Self-defense, including the silent signal for help. She demonstrates it at the beginning of every class, tells the kids it saved her life once. Something shifted in Aaron's chest. The signal had reached him across a crowded terminal. Now Lily was teaching it to others, extending the chain of awareness, turning her trauma into protection for children who might someday need it. There's more, Tobias said. One of the kids in her class used the signal 3 months ago. Teacher saw it, investigated, discovered abuse in the home. Child is now in protective custody. Lily's training directly resulted in the intervention. Aaron set down his tablet, his carefully maintained professional distance fracturing slightly. She doesn't know about me. About any of this. No, the trust is anonymous, as you specified. The adoptive family believes it's from a child welfare advocacy organization. Lily has no idea someone intervened in Chicago. Keep it that way. Tobias closed the folder. Why? You saved her life. Changed her trajectory completely. Most people would want recognition for that. Most people didn't build their fortune on extortion and smuggling. Aaron's voice was flat. The last thing she needs is to discover her rescue came from someone like me. Let her believe in systems. Let her believe good people noticed. That's healthier than the truth. The truth is good people did notice. You noticed. Aaron didn't respond to that. He turned his attention back to quarterly reports, to profit margins and operational efficiency, to the machinery of his empire that continued generating wealth through morally ambiguous means. But the photograph of Lily stayed on the table between them. The other children, Aaron said after a moment. The 23 we extracted. Do we have status reports? Most are in stable placements, few still struggling, but receiving appropriate support. The trust model you established for Lily, we've replicated it for the others. Anonymous funding for therapy, education, medical needs the state won't cover. How much has that cost? North of $12 million over 18 months. Money well spent. Tobias studied him with an expression Aaron couldn't quite read. You've changed. Since Chicago. The organization's noticed. The organization needs to mind its business. This is their business. Resources allocated to projects that don't generate revenue. Time spent on operations that increase risk without corresponding benefit. They're asking questions. Aaron looked up from his tablet, meeting Tobias's eyes with the cold certainty that had built his reputation. Tell them I've diversified our portfolio. Trafficking still generates profit, just different kinds of trafficking than we've historically engaged in. This time we're trafficking children out of danger, instead of goods across borders. The moral overhead is lower, and the long-term benefits include not despising what I see in the mirror. That's not an answer they'll understand. Then explain it until they do, or find new employment. Tobias nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing matters. The team does too. We've worked some dark operations over the years. This is the first one that feels like we're building something instead of just taking. We're still taking. Just taking children out of hell instead of taking money from people who can afford to lose it. Aaron returned his attention to the tablet. Same skill set, different application. Tobias stood to leave but paused. One more thing. Lily wrote something. Essay for school about the person who helped her. It's public, posted on the school's website as part of some awareness campaign. I don't need to read it. I think you do. Tobias pulled out his phone, navigated to something, then set the device on the table. Just the first paragraph. Aaron hesitated, then looked at the screen. I don't know who you are. I don't know your name or what you look like, or why you noticed when no one else did. But I was 11 years old and trapped and terrified, and I made a signal I didn't believe anyone would see. You saw it. You saved me. And because you saved me, I'm here now, safe, loved, able to help others the way you helped me. I teach kids the signal you recognized. I tell them that somewhere out there, people are paying attention. That one moment of courage asking for help can change everything, if the right person is watching. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, thank you. You gave me back my life. I'm trying to use it well. Aaron read the paragraph 3 times, then he powered down the tablet, stood, and walked out of the coffee shop into Brooklyn's afternoon chaos, leaving Tobias and the photograph and the essay behind. He had work to do, children to extract, systems to dismantle, a different kind of empire to build. Aaron Renard stood in another airport terminal, 5 years after Chicago, watching crowds move through LaGuardia with the same anonymous efficiency he'd witnessed that first day. Different faces. Same patterns. The machinery of travel grinding forward, processing millions of people through spaces designed for transit rather than attention. He'd returned to New York permanently, but his organization had expanded in unexpected directions. The smuggling operation still existed. You didn't dismantle a criminal empire overnight, and Aaron wasn't naive enough to believe he could transform into something entirely legitimate. But alongside the traditional business, his network now ran a parallel operation. Identifying children in danger, extracting them from situations law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't address, providing resources the system failed to allocate. They called it the pipeline internally. Dark humor, but accurate. Moving vulnerable people from danger to safety, using the same routes and methods that had once moved contraband. Tobias managed most of it now, coordinating with contacts across 15 states, maintaining the surveillance networks that identified threats, handling the logistics of intervention. Aaron had trained him well. The operation functioned smoothly, even when Aaron wasn't directly involved. But Aaron still traveled, still watched crowds, still looked for the patterns others missed. His flight to Boston boarded in 40 minutes. Business meeting with a shipping contractor who didn't know he was negotiating with a man whose legitimate and illegitimate operations had become impossible to distinguish. Aaron checked his watch, opened his laptop to review contracts, settled into the familiar rhythm of airport waiting. That's when he saw her. Teenage girl, maybe 14, sitting 3 rows away with a woman who smiled too much and touched too often. The girl's posture was wrong, rigid, controlled, performatively normal, in ways that triggered recognition in Aaron's carefully trained instincts. She wore long sleeves despite the terminal's warmth, kept her eyes down, responded to the woman's questions with mechanical precision. Aaron watched for 3 minutes, cataloging details. The woman's hand on the girl's knee, possessive. The girl's infinitesimal flinch when addressed. The lack of personal belongings beyond a small purse that looked like it had been recently purchased. Then the girl's hand moved just for a second, adjusting hair. Fingers forming a shape that could have been meaningless, except it wasn't. Thumb tucked, 4 fingers raised, then folded. The signal, Aaron's breath caught. The same signal Lily had made, the same one she now taught to children in Minneapolis. The chain extending, awareness spreading. One moment of desperate communication reaching across a crowded terminal to find someone who understood. No one else reacted. The businessman nearby kept reading. The family with luggage didn't notice. The gate agent made announcements that disappeared into ambient noise, but Aaron saw it. He closed his laptop slowly, deliberately, his mind already shifting into operational mode. First, identify the woman. Facial recognition through his network. Second, determine destination. Third, assess immediate threat level. Fourth, decide intervention strategy. His phone was already out, fingers moving across the encrypted app. LaGuardia, Gate 23. Female minor, approximately 14, accompanied by adult female 40 to 45. Possible trafficking situation. Need immediate background. Tobias responded within 30 seconds. On it. Facial rec running. Stand by. Aaron stood, moving casually toward a position with better sightlines. The woman was scrolling through her phone, relaxed, confident. She looked like 1,000 other travelers, tired, slightly annoyed, waiting for a flight that would take her somewhere she'd probably rather not go. But Aaron had learned to see past surfaces. Learned that monsters rarely looked monstrous, that the worst predators wore the best disguises. His phone buzzed. Preliminary hit. Woman identified as Jennifer Krause, foster care contractor, licensed in New York and New Jersey. Multiple placements last 2 years. Pattern matches Chicago network. We've been tracking her. Aaron's jaw tightened. They dismantled Kieran's network, prosecuted handlers across 4 states, but apparently hadn't found everyone. Predators were adaptive. When one network collapsed, they built another. Another message. Flight manifest shows destination Newark. Do you want us to alert authorities? Aaron considered. Authorities meant the same system that had failed Lily, failed the 23 children his organization had extracted, failed countless others whose signals went unnoticed. Authorities meant paperwork and probable cause, and victims too traumatized to testify. He typed back, "No, I'll handle it," because this was what he did now. What his organization had evolved to do, operating in the spaces where law enforcement couldn't reach, using methods the system couldn't employ, achieving results that mattered more than legality. He watched the girl make the signal again, just a flicker of movement, a desperate hope that someone might understand, and Aaron understood. Understood that 5 years ago, a little girl's hand had moved across a terminal, and that movement had changed everything. Had redirected his empire toward something that almost resembled redemption, had taught him that power measured in dollars and territory meant nothing compared to power measured in lives protected. Lily was safe now, thriving, teaching others the signal that had saved her, and now that signal had reached another child to another witness who happened to be paying attention. The chain continued. Aaron pulled out his phone and made a call. "Tobias, I need a team at Newark Airport. Woman named Jennifer Krause will be arriving in approximately 90 minutes with a minor. I want full surveillance, background package, and extraction plan within 6 hours. Understood. Are you?" "I'm handling the flight. Make sure no one loses them at Newark." "Copy that." Aaron ended the call and approached the gate agent. "Excuse me, I need to change my flight. From Boston to Newark. Same departure time if possible." The agent typed efficiently. "I have 1 seat available. First class? That's fine. Ticket change will be $200. Aaron handed her his credit card without comment. $200 to ensure he stayed close to a child who'd just asked for help in the only language she had left. Small price. The gate agent processed the change, handed back his card and new boarding pass. "You're all set. Boarding begins in 30 minutes. Aaron returned to his seat, reopening his laptop but not really seeing the contracts on screen. Instead, he thought about patterns and signals, and the strange trajectory that had brought him from a childhood surviving his father's invisible violence to this moment sitting in an airport terminal, preparing to dismantle another operation, save another child. He wasn't a hero, would never be one. His hands held too much blood, his empire rested on too many morally compromised foundations, but he was someone who paid attention, someone who noticed when others looked away, someone who understood that the difference between tragedy and intervention was often just one person deciding to act. Boarding was called. Aaron stood, gathered his belongings, and moved toward the gate. As he passed the girl's row, he caught her eye for just a fraction of a second. She looked away immediately, trained not to make contact. But in that instant, Aaron saw everything. The fear, the hope, the desperate calculation of whether that signal had reached anyone or if she was truly alone. She wasn't alone, not anymore. Aaron boarded the aircraft, found his seat in first class, and prepared for the flight to Newark, where a team would be waiting, where surveillance would begin, where another operation would start the process of extracting a child from a situation designed to be invisible. The flight attendant offered him water. He accepted, settled into his seat, pulled out his phone for one final message before takeoff. "I saw it," he typed to Tobias. "Just like Chicago. Same signal. She asked for help, and I saw it." The response came immediately. "Then she's already safe. She just doesn't know it yet." Aaron powered down his phone and looked out the window as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Somewhere in this plane, a 14-year-old girl sat trapped beside a predator, believing no one had noticed her silent scream. She was wrong, and by tomorrow, she'd begin to understand what Lily had learned 5 years ago, that sometimes, in crowded places where everyone looks away, one person pays attention. And that one person can change everything. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.